Of the 10 largest refugee camps in the world, 3 are in Africa. Now, these camps are home to hundreds of thousands of people who have been forced to flee their countries because of economic or political instability, conflict, persecution, or natural disasters. Today on Our Voices, we're going to give you a rare glimpse into what life is like in a refugee camp. Hello there, I'm Haydé Adams-Fitzpatrick.
And I am Hadiza Kiari.
And I am Auriane Itangishaka. And our co-host Ayen is on the ground in Kakuma, in Kenya, a refugee camp with a population of more than 140,000. Ayen, what is it like there?
Hi, ladies. Yes, Kakuma is so large, it's considered the 7th largest city in Kenya. And you can see behind me, it stretches for kilometers. But it's not just vast, it's also very diverse, housing refugees from more than 16 countries. I'm going to go down and introduce you to some of its residents.
Thanks, Ayen. I can't wait to see who she meets.
No, yeah.
You know, across the globe, a record of 6 to 8 million people have now been forcibly displaced from their home countries, and that number is only growing. In Africa, as refugees move from country to country, they run into laws and policies that often leave them in limbo. VOA's Deirdre Murray McIntosh gives us a closer look at the African refugee experience.
According to the United Nations, developing countries, mostly in Africa, are taking in a disproportionate number of refugees, currently 80% of the world's refugee population, especially due to war and conflict.
This forced us to flee so that we could find peace here.
Christopher Boyan, spokesperson of UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, says the situation is dire.
We've seen new conflicts arise in countries and regions around the world that didn't exist before, but that are driving displacement of human beings in very large numbers now.
But it's easy to lose sight of core humanitarian principles when responding to refugee crisis. Eskinder Nagash, President and CEO of the U.S. Committee for Refugees, says governments often treat the refugee crisis as a national security issue rather than a humanitarian one.
They don't see them as another human being. They just see them as a burden to society. The governments are actually fearing refugees.
That is not the case in Guinea-Bissau, where despite a lack of economic opportunities, residents have not only welcomed their Senegalese neighbors, their government announced it would grant citizenship to all Senegalese refugees within its borders and give them ID cards after years, and some for decades, of living in a state of limbo. Africa's open-door policy has been hailed as an example for others. Uganda's 2006 Refugee Act provides a progressive approach that gives refugees the right to work and move freely. Uganda even gives refugees a plot of land to cultivate, a move designed to increase self-reliance.
It's good because here, in Uganda here, we are feeling good. There is no fighting like South Sudan.
As aid agencies see funding cuts to refugee projects, observers have applauded the Ugandan model as a possible solution to Africa's growing migrant and refugee population. Boyan says the refugee crisis is not a problem that can be dealt with on a country-by-country basis.
This really is a global problem. It's a human problem. And we advocate for all countries to work together to find workable, collective solutions to this collective problem.
While the refugee problem is indeed a global crisis, Boyan says it's a manageable one, a crisis that will require the world's courage, leadership, and vision. Deirdre Murray McIntosh for VOA News.
You know, this of course leads us to a very important question. How did we get here? I mean, looking at those images of all these people in refugee camps, it really makes you wonder about so many things. You know, I had an opportunity to spend some time with refugees in South Africa when I was doing some reporting there in the last few days. You know, many of these are young people from places like Zimbabwe, Congo, Brazzaville, Angola, and they see themselves as economic refugees because they've had to flee home in search of jobs, safety, and you know, really economic security. And it really made me wonder if we're living on a continent that is really seeing an unprecedented surge in economic growth in so many parts. Why are people leaving? And we have to ask ourselves, is the growth that we're seeing really inclusive? I mean, the continent is getting younger, and whenever young people are leaving their countries or when they are leaving the continent, that's skills, that's expertise, that's human capital that's never repatriated. It hardly ever comes back to the continent.
That's very true. That's very true. But one thing I can point out is that the media is covering the African exodus as though Africans in large scale are leaving the continent. But research actually shows that majority of Africans aren't leaving the continent. They're staying within the actual continent, within country to country of the continent. And also the point that you made about young people is very crucial, because young people on the continent, many of them are educated, but they don't have the practical skills that they need to actually, fill the jobs in the market. And so we really have to look at the situation in terms of how to systemically change the education system to better the young people. But when you look at the forced migration crisis on the continent, mostly it's about political unrest. When you look at the countries like DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, where people in the North and South Kivu are constantly fleeing, you have a situation where it's been going on for 20, 30 years of unrest. People are going to Uganda, Burundi, Rwanda. There's a cross-migration going on in that region. It's unbelievable. And
it's just an unstable neighborhood.
Unstable neighborhood. And you ask yourself, who is benefiting from this situation? Who is actually, getting something from it? The suffering of the people. I mean, the way I see it, and it's very clear that corporations who are looking to do mining there are benefiting. I mean, corporations like Apple, who's using some of the minerals, the biggest deposit of minerals in the Congo, Samsung, coltan, and tin, and many other minerals that are used in cell phones, airplanes, satellites. You can see that these corporations are really benefiting from it, where Congolese women are being raped. The research shows about 48 to 50 women are being raped per hour every single day. So you ask yourself, would that situation change anytime soon? I wouldn't bank on it if those people are still smuggling the minerals.
We've got to look at the push and the pull factors.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
We look at Nigeria, who, in spite of all of its problems, it still plays big brother to all of these countries seeking asylum. A typical example is Cameroon. We've seen the Anglophone minority in Cameroon feeling marginalized by the French majority. And I mean, Nigeria has had to accommodate as much as over 32,000, people coming from the Anglophone speaking country, being seeking asylum in Cross River and Benue State, But the thing is, on one hand, you have the Cameroon government being accused of killing, protesters, and then on the other, you have the separatists also being accused of killing the military, policemen. But you have to look at the cause of the problem. What is the cause? How did this even happen? How did we get here? And to understand that, you have to go back in time, when you have the colonization by the German, and then, of course, the French and the English, or the British rather, took over, and this happened in 1916. And when that happened, what did they do?
Split the country,
of course. And obviously the French, they took majority, which is about 80%, leaving the British with 20. This clearly already creates, something that what we're facing today. So now we have that part of the English-speaking part. Eventually, when Cameroon got its independence in 1960, they decided, okay, what do we do with the 20%? They split it into two, the Northern Cameroon and Southern Cameroon. Northern joins Nigeria, Southern joins Cameroon. And that's where the problem started, because they feel marginalized. So, I mean, something has to happen.
Yeah. And I also think that a lot of it is political, but a lot of it ends up being economic, because that is what sends people fleeing, not just for their safety, but they also want opportunities. And you were talking earlier about the media and perpetuating these certain narratives, but also the situations that our political leaders are also contributing to. That also feeds into this very negative narrative. In the last decade or so, we've been talking about, Africa rising, but in so many parts, what we're actually seeing is Africans leaving. And so I think it creates this very negative narrative that Africa is this place that not even its own people want to live in. And the only way we can counter that narrative is by creating the economic conditions, creating jobs, sustainable, good, sustainable jobs for people that would make people want to come back, at the very least, that will make them want to stay.
And also the other problem is on the continent, we're constantly struggling with, peace peaceful transition of power. It's very rare nowadays to see peaceful transition of power, in which causing people to fear. When every time we talk about election, fear grips the people's heart and they want to flee before even the election. So you're looking at a situation where if we don't deal with the political tensions, which a lot of times, as you said, it's political, but we have to be able to stop the situation before it even happens by dealing with peaceful transition of power first from the get-go before even, you know,
the thing about fleeing is if you have somewhere to flee to, then you can actually flee. In a country like, you know, when we have Boko Haram, you know, the victims have nowhere else to go to. I mean, they were able to, you know, they moved to places like Niger, Cameroon, and Chad. But at the end of the day, these are not habitable IDP places for them, but they have no other choice. They have no homes to return to.
But look at us in South Africa. We had a peaceful transition to democracy. And still, people have political freedom, but they don't have economic freedom.
Yes,
you hear very many people say, at the end of the day, I cannot put peace and democracy on the table. I need to put food on the table. I need a job. I need economic security.
That's right. Like the Nigerians who said, that peace that go eat.
Being at peace, we go chop.
That's right.
We want to hear what you think. Join the conversation on social media. Catch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Search for our handle, VOA Our Voices. We've got videos and updates. Be sure to share our pages with your friends.
Also, don't forget to use the hashtag VOA Our Voices.
And of course, we're on WhatsApp too. Send us your messages and your videos. Our number there is US country code +1 304 506 3638. So do reach out to us and add your voice to the conversation.
When we come back, Ayen will introduce us to the people of Kakuma refugee camp.
We want to remind you that you are the 5th person on this panel, and it's time for your voices to be heard. Here's what some of you had to say about the refugee situation in parts of Africa.
I lived in Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya. I was 9 when I moved to the U.S., dusty Kakuma, but it was home, it was safe. I remember sleeping outside with my family. I mean, we had a house, but like, it was just fun. Everyone slept outside, it was so hot.
Here we refugees are facing so many challenges. Majority of us are not expecting to go back to their home countries. We are living in poor conditions.
I think the international community needs to help in supporting these people, beef up funding, supporting them in the country that they have fled to, and hopefully stabilizing the regions where there's conflicts, and hopefully these people could go back to their respective countries.
You're watching Our Voices. Welcome back. We've got refugees in Africa under the spotlight. In refugee camps, you'll hear stories of tragedy and heartbreak and why people had to flee their homes in the first place. But there are also stories of hope and resilience. And we're going to go back now to Ayen. She's in Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya for us, and she's going to give us a look at what life is like over there.
You know, a lot of people come to Kakuma to escape conflict or even food insecurity, but some come to pursue their education. I want to introduce you to Kenny. She's 23 years old, and she's here going to school. Kenny, how long have you been here, and what do you want for your future?
I've been here now since 2013. And when I came, though, I faced a lot of challenges, but I've joined primary. After I finished, now I'm in the high school. So in my future, I would like to become a nurse. I just want to help those who are not able to finish, or who are not able now to get the chance to help. So I wanted to offer myself, at least I help people in the hospitals or wherever I will be, even if in the communities. If I have opportunity, I may help them. Yeah.
Kenny is just one of many people here in Kakuma who have hopes and dreams and hope to one way fulfill their destiny.
Thank you very much, Ayen. And it's just making me think of all these stories that we're hearing, very, very different stories from people about what life is like in a refugee camp. I'm sure nobody grows up wanting to live in a refugee camp. Nobody grows up dreaming of being a refugee.
No way.
So it makes one wonder, are refugee camps really the answer to this forced migration issue that we have on the continent?
The refugee migration situation is very complex. I mean, as you said, there's economic part of it, there's a political part of it, there's just so many ways to look at the situation. But the exceptional refugee crisis is found in East Africa, where, as I said earlier, it's just an unbelievable situation going on there. But it also is the place for reference for good practices. I mean, you're looking at Uganda, where they have just a strategy of self-reliance, and it seems to have been working.
Very admirable. I think they get
very
a lot of
on a global scale, that is,
right.
And also because they have freedom of movement. When the refugees come, they have a freedom of movement. They have work permit. They're allowed to work. They're also given a land to plow. They're helped with the health services. And so you see that situation being a place where people have been enabled after having a traumatic situation of leaving their countries, but they're being enabled, they're being shown that they can be part of society, they can contribute to the economic prosperity of the country. And you're seeing that system actually also being replicated in Kenya, where it's actually a conservative country when it comes to refugees, where, they actually put people in camps. The biggest refugee camps are in Kenya, as we see in one of them. In the north, it's a camp called Kalobei. It's actually a resettlement part of the north, where they have actually allowed refugees to be able to mingle with the community, have access to jobs, and have access to actually the economic prosperity there, to enjoy it and to actually be part of a community. So I think that the self-reliance strategies can be a solution.
And you can add Ethiopia to that as well, because they have been one of the countries that have progressed in terms of that. However, in terms of, I wouldn't necessarily agree totally with you, because there are countries, especially places like Cameroon, Nigeria, and Niger. The IDP camps are not places that people would want to live there just because of the situations. It's not habitable. I mean, it's the poor hygienic situation. They've been starved, they're malnourished, but then they have nowhere else to turn to. They haven't rebuilt their homes yet, so where else can they turn to? So in my opinion, it's not really a place that they want to be, but then they're forced to live there. They have no other option.
Well, also, if we're looking at sort of these places in Kenya and Tanzania, where you're seeing either refugee camps or settlements, in South Africa, of course, unlike those places, South Africa issues permits to registered asylum seekers. They are then able to live and work on the streets. They also enjoy some of the very fundamental rights that South Africans have once you have been granted this permit and you are registered, and you can basically live like any other South African. You can start a business, you can do all of these things while your asylum request is being processed. And all this is, of course, thanks to South Africa's very liberal constitution. Of course, that it's about 20 years old or so. But the rest of the country, I think sometimes there isn't the same popular support for those laws. People's thinking, people's perception of others have not yet caught up to that. And so many South Africans, we all know about the xenophobic attacks we see, of course, on other Africans in South Africa. And of course, other Africans are being seen as a threat in the country, that they're taking jobs, that they're taking away South Africans' opportunities, of course.
But Haydé, but my question is, a lot of people, especially on the continent, they see South Africa as a country that's very prosperous, very modern. You would think there's supermarkets where people can work. You would think that there's a lot of jobs. How come South Africans are feeling this fear that someone else is coming to take their jobs when it's a very prosperous country?
Because especially Nigerians.
Oh, Nigerians are very popular there, huh? But, it's because those jobs don't exist. I mean, a lot of that is a myth. That, I was speaking to a Kenyan economic refugee who said to me, we see South Africa as the Europe of Africa. Until we come here and we see so many black Africans are unemployed. And that is the truth. The numbers are actually very scary, because South Africa has a very high unemployment rate, 27.5%. Here's some more numbers. The World Bank says the top 1% of South Africans owns nearly 71% of the nation's wealth, and that the bottom
just 1%.
1%. And the bottom 60% of the nation controls collectively only 7%
and that's
of the
so
country's
similar
assets.
to Nigeria, because the elite control power, and
Right.
it just keeps, it's the same circle over and over again. It's just not, trickling down to the poor people.
It's not just in Nigeria, but you see a lot of places in Africa where ethnicity, clans, regions, and political status is the one that's monopolizing the economy of countries, is causing the divisions among the people.
And unfortunately, in South Africa, ahead of the election next year, a lot of politicians are jumping on the xenophobia bandwagon, saying that refugees, that economic migrants are a national threat, a national
That is
security
so
threat.
sad.
And
That
that's a
is
very
sad.
dangerous road to go down. But at the end of the day, I think refugees, whether they are in a refugee camp, whether they are on the streets, they remain amongst the most vulnerable people that we have in our countries. And so I think the answer is not really just in creating refugee camps and hoping people will thrive there, but to create the conditions at home so that people won't want to flee, so that they will stay and that they can be successful at home.
I think when you talk about perception, Haydé, which might help also the continent and some of the countries, and I'm sure some of the leaders are thinking the same way, is that sometimes the UNHCR is accused of bulging the numbers of refugees, and that caused the tensions and that caused the continent not to prosper in terms of investors coming on the continent. I mean, we see governments always complaining about the numbers and the demonization campaigns. One quote that I see is the DRC recently didn't attend their own conference to fundraise for the refugee. What they say is, we are not denying that there is a humanitarian problem. We don't consider it at that level. We have to avoid making a business out of humanitarian situation, which discourages investors who come and bring economic development. So you see some leaders are really not liking the demonization campaigns.
Right, you're right, absolutely right. Up next, African women on the continent and the diaspora are doing extraordinary things in empowering refugees. After the break, we'll introduce you to our women to watch for this week.
Like Voice of America on Facebook. Follow VOA on Twitter. Join VOA on our YouTube channel. Like, follow, join VOA.
You're with Our Voices. Welcome back. It's time for our Women to Watch segment, my favorite, which highlights women on the African continent and in the diaspora who are doing extraordinary things.
Ladies, my woman to watch is standing right next to me. This is Natalie Dunda. She works for UNHCR here in Kakuma, and I could tell you her work is really changing lives. In your own words, could you tell us what you do here?
Thank you, Ayen. I'm the Senior Environment Associate for UNHCR Kakuma. My main role is coordinating all actors in the energy and environment field to ensure we have harmonized interventions for the refugees, ensuring they have access to safe, sustainable energy solutions, both cooking and lighting, and also bringing together all actors from the government, private sector to ensure our interventions target a wider audience and overall lead to economic growth.
Amazing.
Thank
Well, I
you.
can tell you that her work is really changing lives here. That's it for me. Back to you in the studio.
This week, I'm watching a group of women, the artisans of women craft design, refugee women producing high-quality fair trade home decor products. Their mission is to increase economic opportunity in the post-conflict tri-border area of Rwanda, Burundi, and Tanzania by bringing rural women together, facilitating their growth and connecting their artistry to the global marketplace. Following a peace-centered approach, over 300 women from these countries work together with one common goal. Women Craft Design is proud to say these relationships have reduced tensions between former refugees and refugee host communities and have built unity in a region marred by conflict.
I am watching Amy Sarr Fall, ranked among the 10 most influential women in Senegal. She's the founder and director of Intelligence's Press, a nonpartisan political media outlet. She's also committed to the GE7 initiative to improve education for children worldwide. And last year, Fall became a Goodwill Ambassador for Stateless Persons under the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. In her new role, she selflessly offered her time and resources to support the Luku Luku Initiative, a social movement that was created in November 2017 by the UNHCR to transform public perceptions of the African refugees, as well as to empower displaced African refugees to reach their full potential.
And my woman to watch is Mary Tell. She's a champion of refugees in South Africa and runs the Whole World Women's Association. Listen to this. Mary was forced to flee her home country of Cameroon, where she was a human rights lawyer. She was granted asylum in Cape Town, South Africa, and that's where she says she found her true calling, helping refugee women and those with disabilities. She worked to incorporate disabled refugees into South Africa's social grant system. And guess what? Thanks to Mary's hard work, the South African government now provides grants to refugees with disabilities. I say that is how you do it.
That is amazing.
That's right.
Amazing.
That's right.
Who do you think deserves a shout out? Use the hashtag VOA Our Voices and tell us who you think is a woman to watch.
And be sure to watch Our Voices on VOA's website, where you can find the world's top news stories.
We leave you with a quote from Warsan Shire, a Kenyan-born Somali poet and a writer who is based in London, the activist poetess who was named the first young poet laureate of London in 2014 at age 25, often documents stories of journey and traumas of Africans. Warsan used her voice in her poem entitled Home to say, "No one leaves home until home is a sweaty voice in your ears saying, leave, run, away from me now. I don't know what I've become, but I know that anywhere is safer than here."
Thank you so much for watching Our Voices. We leave you today on a personal note with our own Ayen reuniting with her family in Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya.
I was once a refugee. I was born in Gambela, Ethiopia, and I once briefly called Kakuma home. My family, who's around me right now, still lives in Kakuma, unable to go back to South Sudan because of conflict and instability. And I just want to take this moment to remind people, politics aside, that refugees are human beings. They deserve dignity, respect, and human rights. On behalf of the Voice of America and on behalf of my family, thank you for watching.